black belt asked the maid's daughter to fight as a joke. Seconds later, her first strike froze the whole gym. "Leave my mother alone." The words came not from Carol, the cleaner frozen in fear, but from her 13-year-old daughter, Abigail, standing at the doorway of the dojo with her backpack still slung over one shoulder. Todd Vance, the black belt instructor who had moments earlier mocked Carol in front of his students, turned with a smirk. "What did you say, little girl?" he sneered, stepping closer. Abigail didn't blink. "You heard me. Apologize." The room went silent. Students shifted uneasily. A child had just challenged a man who believed himself untouchable. What happened next would leave the entire gym frozen in disbelief. This is the story of how a quiet girl, guarding a family secret, changed everything one strike at a time. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A quiet girl's promise to her grandfather was about to be broken. For 20 years, her family's secret had been safe. But tonight, in front of a crowd of strangers, that secret would be used to defend her mother. The scent of clean sweat and polished wood filled the Rising Phoenix dojo. It was a place of discipline, a temple dedicated to the art of combat. On the far wall, framed photos of past champions stared down with stern expressions. Below them, a line of meticulously polished trophies gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights. The silence of the late evening was usually a comfort to Carol Peterson. It meant her work was almost done. At 48, Carol moved with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible. For the past 6 months, she had been the dojo's cleaner. She arrived just as the last class was finishing, her gray uniform blending in with the shadows. She would wait patiently for the students to leave before she began her work, transforming the space from a theater of controlled violence back into a pristine sanctuary. She took pride in her work. The floors had never been cleaner, the mirrors never so free of smudges. But tonight was different. The advanced class, led by the dojo's owner and head instructor, Todd Vance, was running late. Carol tried to stay out of the way, starting her work in the locker rooms. She could hear Todd's voice booming from the main floor, sharp and commanding. He was a man who enjoyed the sound of his own authority. Carol finished the locker rooms and moved to the entrance hall, pushing her wheeled bucket of soapy water. She just had to mop the main floor, and then she could go home to her daughter, Abigail. She peeked around the corner. Todd was demonstrating a complex kick to a small group of his most dedicated students, all of them wearing black belts. They hung on his every word. Todd Vance was in his late 30s, with a build that was solid and powerful. His black belt was tied with practiced perfection, its ends hanging at just the right length. He carried himself with an air of supreme confidence, the kind that often tipped over into arrogance. He believed the dojo was his kingdom, and everyone in it was one of his subjects. Carol waited, staying near the edge of the large training mat. She dipped her mop into the bucket, wrung it out, and began cleaning the hardwood floor surrounding the padded area. She moved backward slowly, her eyes on her work, trying to remain a ghost. One of the students, a young man with a cocky smile, missed a step in the sequence Todd was teaching. He stumbled slightly. Todd stopped instantly. "What was that, Brian? Did you suddenly forget how to walk? We're not dancing the waltz here. This is a fighting art. It demands perfection." His voice was laced with scorn. The young man's face flushed. "Sorry, sensei. I lost my footing." "You lost your focus," Todd corrected him sharply. "Focus is everything. The moment you lose it, you're vulnerable. An opponent will exploit that. A real opponent doesn't care about your excuses." He clapped his hands together, his voice echoing in the large room. "Again, from the top. And this time, try to look like the black belt you claim to be." The students resumed their practice, their movements now more tense, more careful. Carol continued her mopping, her back to the class. She was almost finished with the perimeter. As she pulled her mop back for another pass, the long wooden handle bumped a small metal water bottle someone had left on the floor. It tipped over with a loud clang, rolled a few feet, and came to a stop just on the edge of the white mat. Every head in the dojo snapped in her direction. The students stopped moving. The sudden silence was deafening. Carol froze, her heart sinking. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her face growing hot with embarrassment. She quickly set her mop aside and hurried to pick up the bottle. Todd Vance turned slowly, a look of pure annoyance on his face. He stared at Carol as if she were a bug he had just found on his pristine floor. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "I said I'm sorry, sir," Carol repeated, a little louder this time. She held the water bottle in her hand, unsure what to do with it. It was an accident. Todd walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped just a few feet away, forcing her to look up at him. "An accident," he repeated, letting the word hang in the air. He glanced at her simple gray uniform, her worn-out cleaning gloves, and the bucket of murky water. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. "This is a place of concentration," he said, his voice rising so all his students could hear. "We are practicing a deadly art. Distractions can be dangerous. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir. I do." "It won't happen again," Carol said, her voice trembling slightly. She just wanted to disappear. But Todd wasn't finished. He saw an opportunity to perform for his audience. "You know," he said, circling her slowly, like a shark. "I've watched you work. You come in here every night, pushing that mop. So quiet, so humble." He said the word humble, as if it were an insult. He turned to his students. "Everyone, pay attention. We have a special guest for our lesson tonight." A few of the students chuckled nervously. Brian, the one who had stumbled earlier, looked relieved that the focus was no longer on him. Another student, a thoughtful young man named Ben, watched the scene with a frown, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked uncomfortable. "Tell me," Todd said, turning back to Carol. "What do you think we do here every day?" Carol was confused by the question. You teach martial arts, sir." "I teach martial arts," he mimicked in a high-pitched, mocking tone. "That's right. And what does that mean?" "It means we teach strength, discipline, respect." He paused for dramatic effect. "It's about knowing your place in the world. Some people are fighters. They lead. They command respect." He gestured to himself and his students. "And some people, well, some people clean the floors." The sting of his words was sharp, and Carol felt a lump form in her throat. She had worked hard her entire life. She had raised a daughter on her own, always providing, always teaching her the importance of dignity in labor. Now, in front of these strangers, her work was being used as a punchline. "I bet you've never been in a real fight in your life, have you?" Todd pressed on, his smile widening. Carol shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. "No, sir. Of course not," he scoffed. "Your hands are for scrubbing, not for striking." He then did something that sent a wave of shock through the room. He pointed a finger at her. "How about a little demonstration? For the class?" Carol's head shot up. "What? A demonstration?" Todd said, his eyes gleaming. "You and me, right here, on the mat. We'll show these students the difference between a trained warrior and an ordinary person." The room fell completely silent. The students stared, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Ben, the thoughtful student, took a half-step forward as if to intervene, but then stopped, unsure of himself. Carol was horrified. "Sir, I couldn't. I don't know how to fight." "That's the point," Todd exclaimed with a loud, theatrical laugh. "It will be an educational experience. I won't hurt you. Much." He gestured grandly to the center of the mat. "Come on. Don't be shy. Show my students what happens when someone without discipline steps into a world they don't understand." Tears welled in Carol's eyes. She felt utterly trapped. To refuse was to invite more ridicule. To accept was unthinkable. She was a cleaner, a mother, not a prop for this man's ego. "Please, sir," she begged, her voice cracking. "Just let me finish my work." "What's the matter?" "Scared," he taunted. "Don't worry. I'll go easy on you." It was at that moment that a new voice cut through the tense atmosphere. It was quiet, yet it carried a surprising weight. "Leave my mother alone." Everyone turned. Standing by the entrance to the dojo was a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 13. She had long, blonde hair tied back in a simple ponytail and was wearing jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt. She was holding a school backpack in one hand. It was Abigail. She had come to walk home with her mother, as she often did. She must have been standing there for a few minutes, watching the entire humiliating exchange. Her face was pale, but her blue eyes were steady, fixed directly on Todd Vance. There was no fear in them, only a cold, clear focus. Todd seemed momentarily surprised, then he burst out laughing. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Well, look what we have here." Little Red Riding Hood has come to save her mommy from the big, bad wolf. He swaggered over to Abigail, looking down at her from his considerable height. What did you say, little girl? I said, leave her alone, Abigail repeated, her voice perfectly even. She didn't flinch under his intimidating gaze. She's just doing her job. You have no right to treat her like that. Todd's amusement grew. No right. I have every right. This is my dojo. My rules. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone to hear. Your mother was creating a disturbance. And now you are too. Maybe you both need a lesson in respect. Carol rushed to her daughter's side, putting a protective arm around her. Abby, no. Don't. She whispered urgently. Let's just go. We're not going anywhere, Mom, Abigail said, her gaze never leaving Todd. Not until he apologizes. The word apologize seemed to strike Todd as the funniest thing he had ever heard. He threw his head back and laughed again, a full-throated roar of ridicule. His students joined in, some hesitantly, others with genuine mirth. The dojo, a place of discipline, had turned into a schoolyard, and Carol and her daughter were the targets of the bully. Apologize, Todd finally gasped, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. To her? For what? For trying to teach her something about the real world. He looked from Abigail to Carol and back again. A new, cruel idea began to form in his mind. The demonstration he had planned was good, but this was even better. You know what? He said, his smile turning predatory. You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. But guts aren't enough in this world. You need strength to back it up. He straightened up and addressed his students again. Class, a change of plans. The demonstration is still on, but we have a new volunteer. He pointed a thick finger at Abigail. Since the daughter is so eager to defend her mother's honor, he announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm, she can take her place on the mat. A wave of murmurs went through the students. This was no longer just a mean-spirited joke. It was crossing a serious line. Challenging a grown woman was bad enough. Challenging a child was unthinkable. Ben finally spoke up. Sensei, maybe this isn't a good idea. She's just a kid. Todd shot him a look that could freeze fire. Are you questioning my teaching methods, Ben? I thought I taught you better than that. This is the ultimate lesson. It's about consequences. She wants to step into the world of warriors. She'll be treated like one. He turned his attention back to Abigail. His voice was a sickeningly sweet mockery of kindness. So what do you say, little hero? You want me to apologize to your mother? Earn it. Step onto the mat with me. Just a little spar. If you can even land a single touch on me, I'll get down on my knees and apologize to both of you. But if you can't, he let the thread hang in the air. Carol held her daughter tightly. Abby, don't listen to him. He's a cruel man. We're leaving. Right now. She tried to pull Abigail toward the door, but the girl stood firm, her feet seemingly rooted to the floor. Abigail looked at her mother's face, at the tear tracks on her cheeks and the deep shame in her eyes. She saw the years of hard work, the quiet sacrifices, the unwavering love. And in that moment, a promise she had made long ago echoed in her mind. A promise made to her grandfather in his sunny backyard, the scent of cut grass in the air. The techniques I'm teaching you, Abby, the old man had said, his voice a gentle rumble. They are not for sport. They are not for pride. They are for protection. You only use them when there is no other choice. You use them to defend those who cannot defend themselves. This was one of those times. There was no other choice. Abigail gently removed her mother's arm from her shoulder. She looked at Carol and gave her a small, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It's okay, Mom. I have to do this. She then turned to Todd Vance, her expression unreadable. You want to fight me? She asked, her voice clear and calm. Fine. I accept your challenge. The laughter in the dojo died instantly. The students stared, dumbfounded. Had this 13-year-old girl truly just agreed to fight a third-degree black belt? Todd's jaw dropped for a second before his face split into a wide, incredulous grin. He couldn't believe his luck. This would be a story he'd tell for years. The night a little girl tried to play hero in his dojo. Excellent, he boomed, clapping his hands together. Everyone, circle up. Lesson's about to begin. He was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet, filled with arrogant glee. Carol watched in a state of numb horror as her daughter slipped off her backpack and placed it carefully on a bench. Abigail walked to the edge of the mat, took off her worn sneakers, and placed them neatly side by side. Then, with a composure that seemed utterly alien for a child her age, she stepped onto the pristine white mat. She walked to the center and stood there, waiting. She was a small, slender figure in a vast, empty space, surrounded by a circle of grown men. Across from her, Todd Vance was making a show of stretching his neck and cracking his knuckles, playing the part of the powerful warrior about to dispense a harsh lesson. He was savoring the moment, drawing out the humiliation. "Now, the rules are simple," he said loudly, for everyone to hear. "I'm going to try to teach you something about respect. Your job is to try to survive." Abigail didn't respond. She just watched him, her breathing slow and even. Her hands were relaxed at her sides. She seemed completely calm, but inside her chest, her heart was beating a steady, determined rhythm, like the drumbeat of a soldier marching into battle. She was afraid, but her grandfather's voice was a steady presence in her mind, a calming anchor in a sea of fear. "Breathe, Abby," he would say. "Fear is just a visitor. Let it come, acknowledge it, and then let it pass through you. Don't let it build a home in your mind. Your focus is your fortress." She took a slow breath in and let it out. The visitor was passing. Todd finished his theatrical warm-up. "Ready, little girl?" he sneered. Abigail gave a single, slow nod. "Good," he said with a vicious smile. "Let's begin." He dropped into a classic fighting stance, his fists raised, his body coiled like a spring. He looked powerful, dangerous, and utterly confident. And then Abigail moved. It wasn't a dramatic shift. She didn't raise her fists. She simply adjusted her feet, setting them shoulder-width apart. Her knees bent ever so slightly. Her shoulders, which had been tense, relaxed and settled. Her hands came up slowly, not in fists, but with open palms, one held slightly in front of the other. It was not a stance from any martial art the students recognized. It was simple, grounded, and strangely efficient. There was no wasted energy. Every line of her body looked solid, balanced, and ready. Ben, the student who had tried to intervene, felt a sudden chill run down his spine. He had spent years studying different martial arts, watching old films, reading books about the great masters. He had never seen that stance in person, but he had seen drawings of it in a dusty old book about military combat systems. It was a stance designed for one purpose only: absolute efficiency in neutralizing a threat. Todd didn't notice. He just saw a little girl with her hands up. "What's that supposed to be?" he mocked. "You going to ask me for a high five? Or are you surrendering already?" Abigail remained silent. Her blue eyes were fixed on him, not with anger, but with an unnerving intensity, as if she were solving a complex mathematical problem. She was analyzing his posture, his weight distribution, the tension in his shoulders. Frustrated by her lack of a fearful response, Todd decided to end it quickly. He would embarrass her with a single, swift move. He lunged forward. It was a textbook front kick, aimed at her midsection. It was fast, powerful, and designed to knock the wind out of an opponent, sending them staggering backward in pain. For a 13-year-old girl, it would be devastating. But the kick never landed. Just as his foot was about to connect, Abigail shifted her weight. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible. She pivoted on the ball of her back foot, turning her body just enough so the kick flew past her, missing by less than an inch. Her movement was so fluid, so economical, it was like a willow branch bending in the wind. Todd was suddenly off balance, his leg overextended, his side completely exposed. He had expected to hit a solid target. Instead, he found only empty air. He stumbled, catching himself before he could fall. For a split second, the dojo was silent. The students held their breath. They had just witnessed something impossible. A girl with no training had just effortlessly evaded a black belt's signature attack. Todd spun around, his face a mask of confusion and rage. "Beginner's luck," he snarled, more to himself than to her. He attacked again, this time with a flurry of punches, a jab followed by a cross. It was a classic combination, fast and direct. This time, Abigail didn't even pivot. As the jab flew toward her face, she tilted her head to the side. The punch skimmed past her ear. As the cross followed, she swayed backward from her waist, her feet never moving. The second punch sliced through the air where her head had been a moment before. She had dodged two lightning-fast punches by moving no more than a few inches. "Your movements are too wide," Abigail said. Her voice was soft, but in the dead silence of the room, it sounded like a judge delivering a verdict. You telegraph your intentions with your shoulders. Todd stared at her, his chest heaving. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. A child was critiquing his form. His perfect form. Humiliation burned in his gut, hot and acidic. His carefully constructed world of dominance was cracking. The respect of his students was evaporating. He could see it in their wide, disbelieving eyes. He lost control. All thoughts of teaching a lesson vanished, replaced by a raw, primal need to crush the source of his embarrassment. He let out a roar of pure fury and charged at her, his arms swinging wildly. He was no longer a martial artist. He was just a thug. He threw a wild haymaker, a punch with all of his weight and anger behind it. It was a sloppy, desperate move, but it was powerful. If it landed, it would be catastrophic. Abigail watched the punch coming. The world seemed to slow down. She saw the rage in Todd's eyes, the desperation in his posture. She felt a flicker of pity for him, but it was drowned out by the memory of her mother's tears. She saw her opening. She did not retreat. She did not dodge. Instead, as the huge fist barreled toward her, she took a small step forward, moving inside the arc of the punch. And then, she struck. It was not a punch. It was not a kick. It was something else entirely. Her left hand shot out, open-palmed, and deflected Todd's descending arm at the wrist, turning his own momentum against him and pulling him further off balance. At the exact same instant, her right hand moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast to follow clearly. It was her first true strike of the fight. She didn't aim for his head or his chest. She aimed for a very specific point below his rib cage, the solar plexus. Her fingers were held stiff and straight, like a spearhead. The strike landed with a sound that wasn't loud, but was sharp and final, like a dry stick snapping. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Todd Vance froze. His entire body went rigid. The wild punch he had thrown fell harmlessly to his side. The enraged roar died in his throat, replaced by a choked gasp. His eyes, which had been blazing with fury, were now wide with shock and utter confusion. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. It felt as if an electric current had shot through his entire nervous system, short-circuiting everything. The whole gym froze with him. Every student, every person in the room, stood as if they had been turned to stone. Their mouths hung open. Their eyes were locked on the scene in the center of the mat, the huge, powerful black belt, standing motionless, paralyzed by the touch of a 13-year-old girl. Abigail withdrew her hand and took a calm step back. She stood in her simple, balanced stance, her expression unchanged. She had not even broken a sweat. The silence in the room stretched for 5, then 10, then 15 seconds. It was a profound, suffocating silence, filled with a dawning, terrifying understanding. This was not a fluke. This was not luck. This was something else. Finally, Todd's body gave out. He didn't fall so much as he crumpled, folding in on himself like a building being demolished. He landed on his knees on the mat with a heavy thud, his hands clutching his stomach, his body convulsing as he fought desperately to draw a single breath into his lungs. He made a horrible, gagging sound, the only noise in the utterly still dojo. Abigail looked down at the man gasping on the floor. Then she looked up, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the students who circled the mat. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "Does anyone else," she asked, "want a lesson?" No one moved. The only sound was the pathetic, wheezing gasp of Todd Vance, kneeling on the mat like a supplicant before a queen. He was the master of this space, the king of his small kingdom, and he had been brought low by a child's touch. The air was thick with a mixture of ozone and disbelief. Carol was the first to break the spell. A strangled sob escaped her lips, and she scrambled onto the mat, her earlier fear for her daughter now replaced by a terrifying new one. What had Abigail done? She threw her arms around her daughter, half to protect her, half to pull her away from the scene of her impossible victory. "Abby, my God, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Abigail didn't answer right away. She leaned into her mother's embrace, and for the first time since she had walked into the dojo, a tremor ran through her small frame. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the stark reality of what had just happened. She had used the skills her grandfather had taught her. She had broken her promise to use them only for defense, and she had done it in a way that could not be taken back. Across the mat, the students began to stir, their minds slowly rebooting after the system crash they had just witnessed. They looked at Todd, then at the small blonde girl wrapped in her mother's arms. It was like looking at a mouse that had just felled a lion. It didn't make sense. Their entire understanding of strength and power had been turned upside down. Brian, the cocky student who had been a target of Todd's scorn earlier, looked pale. He had seen the strike. He hadn't understood it, but he had seen its effect. He took an involuntary step backward, as if putting distance between himself and the girl would somehow protect him from the impossible thing he had just seen. But Ben, the thoughtful one, did the opposite. He took a slow step forward. His eyes weren't filled with fear, but with a dawning, electrifying curiosity. He had been replaying the sequence of events in his mind, frame by frame. The evasion, the deflection, and the strike. It was brutally efficient, surgically precise. It wasn't a technique of sport, it was a technique of combat. He had read about such things in books his own grandfather, a veteran of the Korean War, had given him. Books on close-quarters combat systems developed in the crucible of war, where there were no rules, no points, no referees. Only survival. He stopped a respectful distance away from Abigail and her mother. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect he had never once offered to Todd Vance with any sincerity. "That was a system called Krav Maga, wasn't it?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant, but clear in the silent room. "Or something similar. A military discipline." Abigail pulled back slightly from her mother and looked at Ben. She saw genuine curiosity in his eyes, not malice or fear. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "My grandfather taught me," she said simply. Her voice was steady again. Todd finally managed to drag a full, ragged breath into his lungs. The pain was receding, but in its place, a far worse feeling was spreading through him. The icy burn of total humiliation. He pushed himself up, his legs shaky. His face was a twisted mask of fury and shame. "Military discipline," he rasped, his voice raw. He spat on the mat. "That was a cheap shot. A dirty trick. That wasn't martial arts." "You're wrong, Sensei," Ben said, turning to face him. The respectful title was now dripping with irony. "That was the very definition of martial arts. The art of war. You challenged a civilian to a fight, and she ended it. That's the point, isn't it?" Todd's eyes bulged. The nerve of his own student, lecturing him. "She's a child. She attacked me. You challenged her," Ben corrected him calmly. "You mocked her mother. You created this situation. We all saw it." He looked around at the other students, his gaze challenging them to disagree. No one met his eyes. They all looked at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at their defeated instructor. Their loyalty, once absolute, had been shattered. Abigail, meanwhile, was lost in a memory, the name of her grandfather echoing in her mind. His name was Michael Peterson. To the world, he had been a quiet man, a retired postal worker who loved gardening and telling bad jokes. He had been Carol's father, Abigail's beloved Grandpa Mike. But before all of that, he had been Sergeant Michael Peterson, a member of a highly specialized unit in the United States Army. A unit whose existence was not officially acknowledged. He had never spoken to Abigail about war. He never told her stories of battle or bravery. Instead, he had shared its most important lesson, the preservation of life. She remembered a sunny afternoon in his small, neat backyard when she was 9 years old. He was teaching her how to disarm an attacker who was holding a stick. She was small, and he was teaching her how to use leverage and an opponent's momentum, not strength. "You see, Abby," he had said, easily redirecting her clumsy attempt to grab the broomstick he was holding. "Fighting is not about anger. Anger makes you sloppy. It makes you predictable. Fighting is about being calm. It's like a quiet conversation with your opponent's body. You listen to what it's telling you. Where's the weight? Where's the tension? Where's the opening?" He had knelt down to be at her eye level, his gaze serious but kind. "The techniques I'm teaching you are dangerous. They were designed for soldiers, for situations where your life is on the line. They are not a toy. They are a tool you keep locked away in a box. You only open that box for one of two reasons." "What reasons, Grandpa?" she had asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. "First, if someone is trying to cause you or someone you love serious harm, and you have no other way to escape. Second," he had said, tapping a finger on her chest, "and this is the most important one, you use it to protect someone who cannot protect themselves. You use your strength to be a shield for the weak, not a sword for your own pride. Do you understand? She had nodded solemnly. I understand, Grandpa. Promise me, Abigail, he had said, his voice a low rumble. Promise me you will honor that. You will never use this for a trophy, or for revenge, or to show off. You will only use it as a last resort, to protect. I promise, she had whispered. And she had meant it. A tear traced a path down her cheek in the present. Had she broken that promise tonight? She had not been in physical danger. But her mother had been harmed. Not her body, but her spirit. Her dignity had been under attack. Todd Vance had been trying to break her down, to humiliate her for his own amusement. In that moment, Abigail had decided that constituted serious harm. She had opened the box. Her grandfather had passed away 2 years ago, leaving a hole in her life that could never be filled. But his lessons remained, etched into her muscle memory, a part of her very being. He had given her a gift, and a terrible burden. Todd, seeing the tide of opinion turning against him, resorted to the last refuge of a defeated bully, threats and authority. Get out, he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Abigail and Carol. Both of you, get out of my dojo. You're fired, he added, looking at Carol with pure venom in his eyes. And you, he said, rounding on Abigail. If I ever see you near this place again, I'll call the police. Assault. That's what that was. Carol flinched, but Abigail stood her ground. You won't call the police, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Because then you would have to explain to them why you were fighting a 13-year-old girl in the first place. You would have to tell them how you threatened her and her mother. You think they'll believe you're the victim? Todd's face went from red to a sickly white. The girl was right. He was trapped. There were half a dozen witnesses. His reputation, his career, it was all crumbling around him. I said, get out, he finally bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. Carol needed no further encouragement. She tugged on Abigail's arm. Let's go, honey. Please. Abigail allowed her mother to lead her off the mat. She picked up her sneakers and her backpack, her movements slow and deliberate. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the line of trophies gleaming in their glass case. They seemed meaningless now, cheap symbols of a hollow victory. Ben stepped forward as she passed. That was incredible, he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Your grandfather. He must have been a great man. Abigail stopped and looked at him. For the first time that night, she offered a small, genuine smile. He was, she said. He was the best. Then she and her mother were gone, disappearing into the cool night air, leaving behind a dojo in turmoil. The remaining students stood in awkward silence, not knowing what to do. Their sensei was defeated, humiliated. The foundation of their training, their belief in his authority and skill, had been utterly demolished. Todd Vance stood in the center of the mat, his kingdom now just a room. He looked at the faces of his students, and for the first time, he didn't see adoration or respect. He saw pity. He saw contempt. He saw doubt. The silence was finally broken by Brian, who walked over to the bench, picked up his gym bag, and headed for the door without a word. Another student followed his lead, and then another. Within minutes, the dojo was empty, save for Todd and Ben. Todd finally looked at his last remaining student. What are you waiting for? He demanded, his voice a pathetic attempt at his old authority. Go on, leave like the rest of them. Ben shook his head slowly. I'm not leaving because I've lost respect for you, Sensei. I'm leaving because I just realized I haven't been learning anything important here. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back at the broken man standing alone in the middle of the room. You talked a lot about strength and discipline, Ben said. But that little girl had more of both in her pinky finger than you have in your entire body. You taught us how to fight. Her grandfather taught her why to fight. And you just learned the difference. Ben walked out, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Todd Vance alone with the scent of clean sweat, polished wood, and his own spectacular ruin. The walk home was silent. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance at the edge of their vision. Carol held her daughter's hand, her grip tight, as if she was afraid Abigail might simply float away. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, the sequence of events that felt more like a dream than reality. The cruel taunts, the impossible challenge, her daughter's calm voice, the blur of motion, the sound of the strike, the sight of that big, arrogant man collapsing. It was too much to process. She had known her father had been in the army. She knew he had taught Abigail some self-defense stuff in the backyard. She had thought it was just a grandfather's way of bonding with his granddaughter, teaching her to be confident, to be aware of her surroundings. She had never, not in a million years, imagined this. When they finally reached their small, tidy apartment on the third floor of an old brick building, the silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Carol went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, her hands moving on autopilot. Abigail went to her room and closed the door. Carol leaned against the kitchen counter, waiting for the water to boil. Who was her daughter? Who was her father, really? Her entire life, he had been a quiet, gentle man. He had fixed her bicycle, helped her with her homework, and walked her down the aisle at her wedding. He had been her rock, a man of simple habits and deep, unwavering love. She could not reconcile the image of that man with the deadly efficiency she had seen in her daughter's hands. An efficiency he had clearly taught her. The kettle whistled, screaming into the quiet apartment. Carol poured the hot water into 2 mugs, her hands shaking slightly. She put a chamomile tea bag in each one and carried them to Abigail's room. She knocked softly. "Abby, can I come in?" A muffled "yeah" came from inside. Carol opened the door. Abigail was sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her sweatshirt and jeans. Her backpack was on the floor, and her worn sneakers were placed neatly beside it. She was staring at a framed photograph on her nightstand. It was a picture of her and Grandpa Mike. They were in his backyard, both of them grinning at the camera. He had his arm around her, and she was holding a bright yellow watering can. It was a picture of a perfectly normal, happy day. Carol sat down on the bed beside her, handing her a mug. "Here." Abigail took the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth. "I broke my promise, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What promise?" Carol asked gently. "Grandpa made me promise. I was only supposed to use that to protect people, as a last resort, when there was no other choice." She looked up at her mother, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "He would be so disappointed in me." Carol put her own mug down and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Oh, honey. No. No, he wouldn't." She held her tight. "You were protecting me. You were being a shield. That's exactly what he would have wanted. But I hurt him." Abigail whispered into her mother's shoulder. "I didn't have to strike him. I could have just pushed him away. I was angry. Grandpa said anger makes you sloppy. He was right. I wanted to hurt him for what he said to you." Carol stroked her daughter's blonde hair. She was finally beginning to understand. The discipline her father had taught Abigail wasn't just physical. It was moral. It was a code of conduct. And Abigail, a 13-year-old girl, was holding herself to that impossibly high standard. What he said, it was cruel, Carol said, her own voice thick with emotion. And what he was going to do, he was going to hurt you to teach me a lesson. You did what you had to do. You ended it. Quickly. You didn't get into a brawl. You were controlled. You were disciplined. That, I think, is exactly what your grandfather taught you. To control a bad situation. They sat in silence for a long time, sipping their tea. The warmth of the mugs and the comfort of their shared presence slowly pushed back the chill of the evening's events. He was a soldier, wasn't he? Carol finally asked the question that had been hovering in her mind. A real one, not just a guy who fixed radios on some base. Abigail nodded. He was in a special group. He said most of what they did was a secret. He told me he left because he saw too many good people use their strength for the wrong reasons. For pride. For power. He said that when he had you, he knew he never wanted you to see that side of the world. He wanted to be a gardener and a mailman. He wanted to be a normal dad. It was all starting to make sense. Her father's quiet nature, his dislike of violent movies, his unwavering moral compass. It wasn't weakness, it was a conscious choice. It was the discipline of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and had chosen to embrace the best of it. And he had tried to pass that choice, that discipline, onto his granddaughter. "I have to tell you something, Mom," Abigail said, her voice serious. "Todd Vance, he won't let this go. Men like him, their pride is all they have. When you take it from them, they become dangerous in a different way. He's going to try to hurt us. Not with his fists. But he'll find a way." Carol looked at her daughter, at the old soul looking out from behind those young eyes. The fear she had felt earlier returned, but it was different now. It was a cold, hard knot of determination. Her father had shielded her from the world's ugliness. Her daughter had just done the same. Now it was her turn. "Let him try," Carol said, and the tremble was gone from her voice. "We'll face it together." Abigail was right. Todd Vance's humiliation festered. In the days that followed, his life unraveled. The story of what happened in the dojo spread like wildfire through the local martial arts community. At first, it was just whispers, rumors of the great Todd Vance being taken down by a child. No one believed it. It was too absurd. But his students had been there. Ben, in particular, felt a duty to the truth. He didn't gossip, but when asked directly by instructors at other dojos, he told them exactly what he had seen. He described the scene with a quiet, unshakable certainty that was impossible to dismiss. The story was always the same. Todd had bullied a cleaner, challenged her young daughter, and had been neutralized by a single, surgically precise strike. Todd tried to spin his own version of the story. He claimed the girl had used a taser, that she had sucker punched him, that it was a setup. But his stories kept changing, and his desperation was obvious. His student base evaporated. No one wanted to learn from a master who had been so easily and so completely defeated, especially not under such dishonorable circumstances. The rising Phoenix Dojo, once a thriving business, became a ghost town. His finances collapsed. He had poured all of his money and ego into the dojo. Within a month, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed, and the for lease sign that went up in the window of his former kingdom was the final nail in the coffin of his career. But Abigail's prediction had been chillingly accurate. A man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous man. Todd's hatred didn't dissipate with his business. It concentrated, hardening into a black, ugly pearl of resentment. And it was all focused on Carol and Abigail Peterson. He started with Carol. He found out where she worked her other part-time cleaning jobs. He began a campaign of harassment. He would call her employers, telling them she was a thief, that her daughter was a violent delinquent. He would show up at her job sites, waiting for her outside, his presence a silent, looming threat. He never touched her. He never spoke to her. He just stood there, watching, his eyes filled with a cold, dead hatred. One by one, Carol lost her other jobs. Employers didn't want the trouble. They didn't want a strange, angry man loitering around their businesses. It was easier to just let her go. Soon, their only income was gone. The eviction notice was not far behind. Carol was terrified, but she did her best to hide it from Abigail. She spent her days looking for new work, but Todd's poison had spread. It seemed everywhere she went. Her reputation had preceded her. Abigail saw the toll it was taking on her mother. She saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way she jumped at every unexpected noise. She saw the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table, and she felt a crushing weight of guilt. This was her fault. She had opened the box her grandfather had told her to keep shut, and now a monster had gotten out. She knew she had to do something. The lessons her grandfather had taught her were not just about fighting. They were about strategy, about understanding your opponent, about finding a solution when there seemed to be none. Never fight on your enemy's terms. Grandpa Mike's voice echoed in her memory. If they want a fist fight, you give them a chess match. If they want to scream, you whisper. Change the battlefield. Control the narrative. Control the narrative. That was it. Todd Vance was fighting them in the shadows, with lies and intimidation. Abigail realized she had to drag him into the light. The battlefield had to change. Todd was using fear and whispers as his weapons. Abigail knew she couldn't fight him on those terms. She had to create a new battlefield, one made of light and truth. Her plan began to form, not as a complete picture, but as a series of connected fragments, guided by her grandfather's strategic principles. The first principle, know your enemy. Todd Vance was a man driven by ego. His entire identity was built on being seen as strong, powerful, and in control. His current campaign of harassment was the desperate act of a man who had lost all control and was trying to reclaim it by destroying them. He was predictable. His anger made him sloppy. The second principle, gather intelligence. She needed proof. Todd was being careful not to make direct physical threats, which made his actions hard to report to the police. It was his word against theirs. She needed something undeniable. The third principle, and the most important, choose your ground. She couldn't let the final confrontation be in a dark alley or an empty parking lot. It had to be somewhere public, somewhere his usual tactics of intimidation would be useless. She needed an ally. There was only one person she could think of who had seen the truth of that night, and had the courage to speak it. It took her 2 days to find Ben. She remembered the name of the dojo from the sign outside. A quick search on the internet gave her its social media page. Though the page was now mostly filled with angry comments and one-star reviews, she was able to look through old posts and find photos from a regional tournament a few months back. She scanned the faces of the students posing with their trophies until she found him. The caption listed his full name, Ben Carter. From there, it was another search, this time through the online student directory for the local high school. There was only one Ben Carter listed. The school wasn't far from her own. The next afternoon, she waited across the street from the high school's main entrance, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She felt conspicuous and out of place among the throngs of older students. When she finally saw him emerge, walking with a group of friends, she almost lost her nerve. But then she thought of her mother's tired face, and her resolve hardened. "Ben," she called out, her voice stronger than she expected. He stopped and looked around, confused. His friends kept walking. Abigail crossed the street and approached him. "I'm Abigail Peterson," she said, just in case he didn't recognize her. From the dojo. Recognition, and then surprise, dawned on his face. "Of course. I remember. Is everything okay?" He looked at her with genuine concern. "No," she said honestly. "It's not. Todd Vance, he's been harassing my mother. He got her fired from her other jobs. We're in trouble. I need your help." She explained everything that had been happening since that night. The phone calls, the stalking, the looming threat of eviction. Ben listened patiently, his expression growing darker with every word. "I knew he was a jerk, but I didn't think he was capable of this," he said, shaking his head in disgust. This is evil. "The police can't do much," Abigail explained. "It's hard to prove. What I need is a witness. And evidence. I have a plan, but I can't do it alone." "Whatever you need," Ben said without a moment's hesitation. "I'm in. What's the plan?" Over the next week, they put her plan into action. Carol managed to get a temporary cleaning job at a downtown office building, working the late shift. It was the perfect opportunity. Ben, using the high-quality camera on his new smartphone, became a counter-surveillance expert. On the first night, he positioned himself in a coffee shop across the street from the office building. Just as Abigail had predicted, it wasn't long before Todd Vance's beat-up pickup truck rolled into view and parked half a block down. He didn't get out. He just sat there, the faint glow of his own phone illuminating his face as he stared at the building's entrance. Ben filmed him for over an hour, a steady, unwavering shot that documented the calculated, intimidating presence of the truck. They did the same thing for the next 3 nights. Every night, Todd was there, a silent predator waiting in the dark. Ben's phone now contained hours of time-stamped video, establishing a clear and undeniable pattern of stalking. This was the intelligence they needed. Now it was time to change the battlefield. Abigail knew that simply taking the video to the police might get Todd a warning, but it wouldn't solve their problem. It wouldn't restore her mother's reputation or get her jobs back. A restraining order was just a piece of paper to a man like Todd. He would just become sneakier. She had to dismantle his ability to harass them entirely. She had to take away his credibility, the only weapon he had left. The local community had a popular online forum, a Facebook page called Oak City Neighbors. It was a place where people recommended plumbers, announced yard sales, and occasionally aired grievances. It was moderated by a well-respected local woman, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Gable. It was the town square of the digital age. This would be her ground. With Ben's help, she crafted a post. It wasn't angry or accusatory. It was calm, factual, and written from the perspective of a concerned daughter. The post began, "A public appeal for help for my mother, Carol Peterson. My name is Abigail. My mom is the hardest working person I know. For the past few weeks, she has been the target of a relentless harassment campaign by a man named Todd Vance, the former owner of the Rising Phoenix Dojo." She went on to detail what had happened, starting with the loss of Carol's jobs due to slanderous phone calls, and then describing the nightly stalking. She explained that they were afraid and that they were facing eviction. She kept the language simple and direct. She made her mother the victim, which she was, and Todd the aggressor. And then came the final, crucial part of the plan. She didn't post the video evidence. Instead, she laid a trap. The post concluded, "This man sits outside my mother's new workplace every night for hours, trying to intimidate her. We have proof." We have hours of video evidence. We are asking him, publicly, to please stop. Leave our family alone. All we want is to live in peace." She then tagged Todd Vance directly in the post. She had found his personal Facebook profile easily. It was public, and his recent posts were a sad collection of bitter rants about his business failing and the world being unfair. "Why aren't we posting the video now?" Ben asked as they reviewed the draft. "That's the knockout punch." "Because a knockout punch isn't what we need," Abigail explained, her grandfather's voice a quiet guide in her mind. "We need him to discredit himself. Right now, he's a faceless bully. We have to give him a stage, and he'll do the rest for us. His ego won't be able to resist it." They posted it late on a Friday evening, when online activity was at its peak. Then, they waited. It took less than 10 minutes. Todd Vance's reply appeared in the comments section, and it was everything Abigail had predicted. It was a torrent of rage, self-pity, and outright lies. "This is slander," he wrote, his use of all caps betraying his fury. "This little brat is the one who should be arrested. She assaulted me in my own dojo. Her mother is a lazy worker who I had to fire for incompetence. They are trying to extort money from me because my business failed. I have never harassed them. This is a complete lie, and I am contacting my lawyer." The community page exploded. People started taking sides. Some who knew Todd defended him, saying he was a respected business owner. But others were disturbed by the tone of his reply. Yelling in all caps and attacking a child didn't make him look like a victim. Mrs. Gable, the moderator, stepped in. "Mr. Vance, this is a serious accusation. The girl claims to have video proof of your harassment. Are you saying this video does not exist?" Todd, blinded by his rage, walked straight into the trap. "It doesn't exist. It's a bluff. They are lying. I have never been anywhere near that woman's job. Let them show this supposed video. They can't because it's a lie." He had taken the bait. He hadn't just denied the harassment. He had denied the very existence of the evidence. He had publicly called her a liar and staked his entire credibility on the video being a bluff. Abigail took a deep breath. "Okay, Ben," she said. "Now." Ben uploaded the first video. It was 5 minutes long, a condensed version of the first night's surveillance. It clearly showed the street, the office building, and Todd's truck parked in the shadows. Ben had even managed to zoom in, capturing a clear, if grainy, image of Todd's face illuminated by his phone. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner. He posted it with a simple, devastating caption, "Video from Monday night. As you can see, Mr. Vance is lying. We have more." The effect was like dropping a boulder into a pond. The entire tone of the online conversation shifted instantly. The people who had been defending Todd fell silent. Others who had been on the fence were now horrified. "Wow, he just said he was never there. That's definitely him. And that's his truck. This is creepy. He's stalking that poor woman." Mrs. Gable posted again, her tone now icy. "Mr. Vance, you have been caught in a very serious lie. This is unacceptable behavior in our community." Todd's response was a string of incoherent, panicked denials. He claimed the video was fake, that it was doctored, that it wasn't his truck. But the damage was done. His credibility was not just broken, it was shattered into a million pieces. Ben then uploaded the second video, from Tuesday night, and then the third, from Wednesday. Each one was another nail in the coffin of Todd's reputation. He had built his identity on being a strong man, a master of his domain. Now, in the bright, unforgiving light of the town's digital square, he had been exposed for what he truly was: a liar, a bully, and a coward who stalked women in the dark. The battle was over. Abigail had won. She had not thrown a single punch. She had used the truth as her weapon, and her opponent's own ego as the fulcrum to defeat him. The next morning, their apartment doorbell rang. Carol and Abigail exchanged a nervous look. Carol opened it to find a police officer and Mrs. Gable standing in the hallway. "Mrs. Peterson," the officer said kindly, "we've received a number of calls concerning the harassment you've been experiencing. Mrs. Gable here shared the online thread with us. We have enough to issue a formal restraining order, and I think we have a strong case for stalking charges." Mrs. Gable stepped forward, her eyes warm with compassion. "And I've been on the phone all morning," she said, holding a small notepad. "I've spoken to your previous employers. Once they understood the situation, they were horrified. 2 of them have already offered you your job back, and a few other local business owners have reached out, asking if you're looking for work. This community looks after its own, dear. We won't let a bully win. Tears streamed down Carol's face, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of relief, not fear. The aftermath was swift. Faced with criminal charges and public disgrace, Todd Vance left town. His pickup truck was seen heading north on the interstate, and he was never heard from in Oak City again. He had become a ghost, banished by the community he had tried to terrorize. Life for Carol and Abigail slowly returned to normal, but it was a new kind of normal. Carol got her best job back, and with the support of the community, she felt a sense of security she hadn't had before. The cloud of fear that had been hanging over them was gone, replaced by the warm sun of a brighter future. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a few weeks later, Abigail was in the small community garden behind their apartment building, tending to a patch of tomatoes. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see Ben standing there, holding a small, clumsily wrapped gift. Got you something, he said, looking a little embarrassed. To say thank you for teaching me something important. Abigail unwrapped it. It was a small, leather-bound journal and a nice pen. I realized, Ben said, shuffling his feet. That what you did, it was the real martial art. The strategy, the discipline, using your mind instead of your fists. I quit the dojo stuff. I've started studying chess instead. I figured I should write down what I'm learning. Abigail smiled, a wide, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Grandpa Mike would have liked that, she said. He always said the strongest muscle was the one between your ears. She looked at the journal in her hands. It felt like a new beginning. She thought about her grandfather's legacy. He had taught her how to fight, yes, but he had also taught her how to be strong in a world that had too many different kinds of monsters. He had given her a set of tools, and she was finally beginning to understand how to use all of them. She had protected her mother. She had honored her promise. And she had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength wasn't about how hard you could strike, but about how resiliently you could stand in the light, armed with nothing but the truth. The secret her family had kept for 20 years was finally out, not as a weapon of violence, but as a testament to a quiet old soldier's enduring wisdom. And in the peaceful quiet of the garden, Abigail knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her grandfather would have been very, very proud. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comments section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.